So when we saw Tijani Reijnders take that lap of honor around the San Siro with his son on his shoulders, most of us knew he was gone. But the answer to the question why did Milan decide to sell him, that question still exists. I'm gonna use the same concept of the good, the bad, and the ugly in respect to the sale of Tijani Reijnders. And we will try to answer the question throughout the course of the video as to why this transfer took place. So instead of going the good, the bad, the ugly, let's flip this around and start with the ugly first. I guess the ugliest part about this entire situation is the fact that the guy's been sold. He is, on a technical level, the third most expensive sale in the history of the club after Kaká and Sandro Tonali. Although the financial breakdown of this deal we're going to discuss a little bit later, because there's a very good chance that Tijani Reijnders may just become the most expensive player ever sold by AC Milan. I think that's the ugly factor we have to take into consideration and might be one of the first reasons why Tijani Reijnders was sold. You know, this was a graphic that was doing the rounds around social media. Milan buying players for cheap, turning them into stars, and then selling them for big amounts. And this is what I tweeted about that. A tweet that a lot of people won't like, but it doesn't change the fact that it's actually factually accurate. You know, people need to understand that Serie A is just not a profitable league anymore. As I said, this is not a new problem. Milan sold a Ballon d'Or winning Kaká just to balance the accounting books. Everybody knows that that's why Adriano Galliani and Silvio Berlusconi sold the player. And the key to this equation is that Serie A needs to become more profitable for clubs to be able to hold on to these star players. You know, if we go back to the mid-2000s, Milan won the Champions League in 2003, and then 3 years later sold the man that won them that Champions League trophy in Andrei Shevchenko. Then they won the Champions League again in 2007. 2 years later, they sold the player who won them that Champions League in Ricky Kaká in 2009. And in both equations, it was very clear that the club was making these sales because their accounting books were going deeper and deeper into the red. They were constantly losing money. And a massive reason for that is the profitability of a team playing in Serie A. You know, just look at this interaction that I had with someone. Serie A's first place payment is 71 million euros. And Premier League's 20th place payment, the last place, is 130 million euros. The worst team in the Premier League is making double in prize money, league prize money, than Serie A's best team. Let's bring it back and make it even more specific to Milan. Finishing in 8th place last season, the Rossoneri will make about 48.75 million euros in prize money from the league. 48.75 million. If Milan played in the Premier League and they finish in 8th place, the club would make about 184 million euros in prize money from the league. That's what Manchester United made last year by finishing in 8th place. 184 million euros. So just look at that discrepancy. Finishing in 8th place and making 48 million euros in Serie A, or 184 million euros in the Premier League. If that was the amount that Milan was making, they probably wouldn't have a need to sell Tijani Reijnders for 65 to 70 million euros. So just the lack of profitability in Serie A is one of the main reasons that this player was sold. So that's an ugly truth, but also one of the reasons why this player was sold. And then we jump into the bad about this deal. And the bad thing about this deal is just the general handling that has come from the top of the club. Now, if we go all the way back to February, there was an interview with Zlatan Ibrahimovic where he talked about the fact that renewals were being discussed with Theo Hernandez, with Mike Maignan, and with Tijani Reijnders. He said all players were happy and that renewals were being discussed and there was negotiations ongoing with these players. As it turns out, just a few months later, all three of them are on the verge of leaving the club. Reijnders is already out. Theo Hernandez is just a matter of time before he leaves. Mike Maignan, if an agreement would have been found, or if Chelsea wouldn't have been as stingy as they've been, if they've just paid up a little bit more, Mike would have been gone too. So you're talking about the fact that you're, negotiating renewals with these guys, but just 4 months later, they're on their way out. That damages trust. Yes, they signed a renewal for Reijnders, but they just signed that renewal to jack up his asking price even more. Smart business, but doesn't make the fans feel good. And it's not just Zlatan. We then look at Jeffrey Moncada. There was an interview sometime in April on camera. On camera, he stepped up and said Reijnders will be staying 100% with the club. Specifically asked if Reijnders is going to be staying, one of your higher up executives says 100% staying. He's gone now. what does that do for your trust amongst the fan base? Or what is the actual intention behind these comments? Because before the final match of the season, when everybody seemed to realize that, okay, there is something brewing here. There is a very good chance that Reijnders will be leaving and Manchester City is at the door waiting to pick him up. In that type of a climate, the CEO of Milan and Giorgio Furlani came out and said that, hey, because of the way that this club is run, sacrifices won't have to be made. This is a point that I've probably drilled through for multiple videos now, but we do have to address this. What does that mean? What does that mean that sacrifices won't have to be made, but then you sell arguably your best player on this team, your best performer from last season, who also won the Serie A Midfielder of the Year award? So now we're talking about a breakdown of, now I'm not sure what the reasoning behind this is, but what I am talking about is that these comments are all on record. On record, you have confirmed that sacrifices won't have to be made, renewals are being discussed with these players, and there's nothing to worry about, and Reijnders will stay 100%. Why come out and make these statements when you very likely know that the player will probably get sold? And I think that's where the second explanation for the sale of Reijnders comes into play. Naturally, we're all aware that because of what happened last season with Milan, the fact that they finished in 8th place, failed to qualify for Champions League, meant that the prize money coming in for the 2024-2025 fiscal year would be significantly less. That would mean that losses would be incurred. It was being rumored that about 25 million in losses were being incurred, and that's why the player was sold. So there is a reasoning that Serie A just doesn't give you and make you enough that you have to sell your star players. But then specifically to Milan, they didn't make enough money last season. They as a club decided that we don't want to end the fiscal year showing a loss. For the first time, I believe in 17 years, if I'm right, it was about 17 years that the club was in the black. They met their costs, turned a little bit of a profit. And just a year or two after turning this club into a profitable club, the last thing that the management and the ownership group wanted to do was watch it go into a loss. The fastest way to be able to save those expenses was sell to Johnny Reijnders. An agreement for Theo Hernandez clearly wasn't found, for Mike Maignan clearly wasn't found. Manchester City was in a panic because of the Club World Cup. They needed to sign a player, and that player's sale means now, instead of being, I guess, 25 million in a loss, the club would be turning a 12 to 13 million euro profit for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. So from an economic standpoint, of course, makes sense. You sell an asset. But why does it have to be one of your best players? That's the part that no one gets. And I think that's a question that is even very difficult for me to answer, because what I do disagree with a lot of fans on is their understanding that, oh, you know what, Redbird or the ownership, the management, they just don't care about the club. They just want to turn profits. They only care about money. They don't care about anything else. I think that is slightly incomplete. In my opinion, a club like an organization like Redbird, when we buy a Milan shirt and it's not good quality, we get so upset about it. This is an ownership group that has spent over $1 billion cumulatively over time on purchasing this club. If it's not doing well or doing what they want it to do, they're not just going to be okay with that. They're going to want to improve it. What I think there's a serious disconnect in, or there has been a serious disconnect in, is the approach to getting to the place where the asset of AC Milan starts to appreciate for Redbird. I think they came into this with the idea and the mindset that they're going to try and turn this into the 21st Premier League club. They're going to have this fast style of attacking football. They're going to invest in these, smaller profile players from the French league, 20 million euro transfers. And then over time, they're going to sell those players, make enough money, and then buy better players. I think the part that they focused on was the economics, what was happening in the scouting network to some degree, what price points they're getting these players at, what these assets would look like in 4 or 5 years, what the contracts are going to be like. But I think the main part that they naturally forgot about is the core piece of the business, which is the football on the field. For that, they became experimental. The same mindset of, oh, we're going to try this different way. Instead of spending 100 million for good quality players, we're going to look at players from the French league and spend 20 million on them. Similarly, we're going to bring this coach named Paulo Fonseca. He's not really been, tested. He hasn't succeeded in Serie A, but we're going to give him a try because we see these metrics that might actually work. But we're going to do this in a clever way that we're going to have a 6-month escape clause. If he doesn't perform well in 6 months, we're going to leave, and then we're going to keep ourselves open to a new coach. We're going to bring him in and see what he does. This kind of trickery is way, way better when it's coming from Cristiano Ronaldo's feet. When it comes to football, things have to be a little bit more simple. Things have to be a little bit more focused on consistency and growth rather than being too clever at times. And I think that is sort of what the arrival of Iglitare points towards. Somebody who's been in the league for 20, even more, played as a player in the league, and then was an executive for 15, 16 years. He brings some calmness, solidity, experience, and brings back the status quo. Same thing with the hiring of Max Allegri. Okay, we tried out that Fonseca thing. We tried to make Pioli play this fast-paced football, but then we lost 5-1 to Inter, so we had to change it. We tried to see what Conceição could do, but now we're just going to go back to the basics. Keep things simple. Bring in an experienced coach who's won 6 Serie A titles, has the experience not from some, French league or some different league. We're going to bring a Serie A man, an Italian man back into the equation and bring some semblance and calmness and familiarity to this team. So I think Redbird and the present management was trying to be too experimental, and that didn't work out after last season. And they realized that they needed to go back to the basics, and that's what they're doing now. But in the process, and the fact that the club failed to make Champions League and finished in 8th place opened up such a gigantic hole in the finances that they needed to fill that in with a quick sale of a highly valuable asset. And from a club and administration standpoint, that's why Tijani Reijnders was sold. The failure of making Champions League and only 48 million euros in prize money from Serie A, it forced their hand. They had to force a sale, but clearly something came from up top that told them that, hey, it's done now. We didn't make Champions League. We're going to lose out on money, but we're changing our system now. Now we want a sporting director who has experience and a coach who has experience in this league. Although, in spite of his excellent talent, there have been some question marks about the potential utility of Reijnders under a Max Allegri system. Reijnders is a free-flowing attacking player, which is not quite the system that Max Allegri likes to adopt. He would fit extremely well in a Pep Guardiola system where you're moving forward and you're creating attacks, you're holding on to possession. Whereas Allegri's system might complement a style of player more like Yusuf Fofana because of the defensive involvement. That's why Milan is being linked with profiles like Adrien Rabiot, with Samuele Ricci. These are more so the type of profiles that would really prosper under an Allegri system, and a player like Reijnders, who's so free-flowing and attacking, might feel a little bit like a caged animal. So that is an element that you do have to think about as to what Reijnders would have looked like, not under Fonseca, Conceição, or even Pioli's attacking system, but a very different system that Allegri brings about. And that sort of brings us to the good. There isn't much good about this deal, but at the end of the day, the club is getting quite a bit of cash, and hopefully they'll be able to reinvest that back into the Mercato. And that's the part that we have to discuss. There have been a lot of Milan fans that have looked at this particular deal and ripped apart the management, said a lot of negative things about the management for their, not just for the fact that they sold Reijnders, but how they sold Reijnders, what kind of pricing they sold Reijnders for. A lot of fans have looked at that 55 million euro price tag and said, how could they possibly sell him for that plus bonuses? Shouldn't the base price have been so much more? And I think that's the good part that does need a little bit of further explanation to fans. Now, I think the number one part about this entire situation is that when the Rossoneri bought Tijani Reijnders from AZ Alkmaar 2 years ago, there was a 10% future sale clause in that deal. So AZ Alkmaar is supposed to get 10% of Reijnders' sale. With Milan selling Reijnders at a base price of 55 million euros, because of that 10% future sale clause, the Rossoneri have to give AZ Alkmaar 5.5 million euros. if they sold him for 70 million euros base price, they would then have to pay AZ Alkmaar 7 million euros. So that's pretty much how and why the club structured the deal in such a manner that with the bonuses, they would be able to keep a lot more money to themselves rather than having to give it back to AZ Alkmaar. And it has been said that of those 15 million euro bonuses, so a 55 million euro base deal with 15 million in bonuses, around 10 to 11 million of bonuses are very easy to attain. Sometimes they are after the 10th appearance that the player makes for the club, you get 2 million euros. Once the club qualifies for the Champions League, you get another 2 million euros. It's easily attainable bonuses. So almost certainly this deal will crank up from 55 million euros to about 65 million euros in just a matter of time. And then the remainder 4 to 5 million euros are more difficult attainable bonuses. There might be one that if in his first 2 seasons he has any season where he scores 12 goals, Milan will get 1 million euros. I'm just giving an example. It could be really anything that the two clubs come to an agreement for. But if the bonuses are met, this deal could climb up all the way to 70 million euros. That, based on this, would make it the most expensive sale in the history of the club. So from a fiscal standpoint, from a monetary standpoint, this is not bad for the reinvestment of funds back into the club for Milan. And then there was some frustration amongst Milan fans also about, why are the payments split? Why don't you just get a deal done where you get 70 million euros, 65 million euros right away and you can put it back into the mercato? At the end of the day, guys, it doesn't really matter. These clubs are not sitting around counting cash. They more focus on the accounting books. And the fact is that because Milan didn't make the Champions League next season, they had to be a little bit more manipulative as to how they structure the payments. The good thing is that because the club is going to lose out on money next season, they're only taking in enough money this season that they can turn a certain amount of a profit. And they're then pushing the remainder of the payment to the future seasons because they know next season they're going to lose out on money because of not making the Champions League. So that little extra money that comes from Reijnders' sale from the previous season will make up for the losses that are incurred during the 2025-2026 season. So at the end of the day, from an accounting standpoint, when it comes to running your club responsibly fiscally, the management actually has done a fairly decent job with this deal. Milan fans would be looking at, an incomplete equation if they just focus on the 55 million euros. That's how much you sold him for. No, it's going to grow in amount, almost certainly to 65, might even climb up to 70 million euros, and the split of the payments will help the accounts in the future seasons. So when it comes to the sale of Reijnders, from a sporting standpoint, this is a serious step back for Milan. But from an economic standpoint, this offers a little bit more balance to what is very important in the long run for a club, which is your finances. Now, the one thing that could sort of save this whole situation a little bit is a good signing like Reijnders was for the Tonali sale. If an XYZ player can be for the Reijnders sale, then it could bring the club back onto a good path. But for the fans to have the frustration that a solid player, a future superstar potentially, was sold just 2 years into his time with the club, just months after he signed an extension till 2030, is understandably something that makes them question the management of the club. Let me know how you guys feel about the sale of Tijani Reijnders. Make sure to follow me on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Twitter at FootballKush. And as always from my side, Forza Milan, grazie mille, ciao tutti. Did you know Benito Mussolini put an end to the existence of Inter Milan? And the only reason why AC Milan is called what it is because of the fascist leader? What led to the breakup of AC Milan and Inter Milan in that restaurant behind the Duomo is fascinating in itself. But what is even more fascinating